Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Have you ever paused to wonder if the world around us is truly moving forward? Or if, despite all the headlines and tech buzz, we're somehow stuck?
Yeah, it's a big question.
Are we living in an age of profound, perhaps even, dangerous stagnation? Or are we, maybe unbeknownst to many, actually on the cusp of truly radical transformative change?
That tension, it's palpable, isn't it? It really cuts to the heart of our modern age.
Exactly. And it's the powerful, unsettling question at the heart of our deep dive today.
That's right. To really unpack this vital question, our deep dive today centers on this compelling concept of civilizational stagnation.
Okay.
And we'll be primarily exploring it through the insights of the iconoclastic investor Peter Thiel,
Mhm.
specifically as his ideas are analyzed and really expanded upon in William L. Weaver's work, The Damming of the River of Reality.
Right, Weaver's analysis. And what makes this so interesting, I think, is that it's not just about one person's perspective, no matter how influential someone like Thiel is. We're kind of using Thiel's provocative ideas as a lens, right, to illuminate these larger systemic patterns that affect, well, all of us.
Exactly. Weaver's The Damming of the River of Reality gives us this critical framework. And we'll also be pulling in his concepts from the River of Reality and the Fortress and the Shifting Sands.
Those are key pieces, too.
They really help you understand the sort of deeper mechanics of this perceived stasis, this feeling of being stuck.
Okay, so what's the mission here? What are we trying to get out of this?
Our mission is pretty clear.
Hmm.
We want to extract the most impactful insights from these sources. We want to help you understand not just what might be happening to the very flow of progress,
But the why behind it.
precisely why it feels so stagnant, and importantly, what the high-stakes choices for our collective future really are.
Okay, strap in then.
Yeah, prepare yourselves. We're about to wade into the powerful and, often turbulent current of reality itself. This promises to be quite the journey of understanding.
All right, let's dive right in then. The stagnation thesis. Now, the idea that progress might be slowing down, it isn't totally new, but it really gained significant traction, maybe uncomfortable traction, when Peter Thiel first articulated it.
Right, Thiel, co-founder of PayPal, Palantir, early investor in Facebook,
Hmm.
someone deep inside the tech world.
Exactly. And he laid this out in that influential 2012 essay for National Review, the one called The End of the Future.
That title alone. For a magazine like National Review, which usually champions, optimism and innovation,
It was a statement, a stark one.
it really set a different tone for the whole discussion. What made his core argument so counterintuitive, maybe even shocking to some, was exactly that it came from within Silicon Valley.
From someone who got rich off the digital revolution.
Precisely. He basically argued that this dynamic, ever-changing modern world we all thought we lived in, well, it wasn't nearly as dynamic as people assumed.
He said stagnation had set in.
A period of widespread technological and societal stagnation. Yeah. Affecting way more than just the digital world. There's a real challenge to that narrative of constant, across-the-board progress.
Okay, but it's crucial to get his distinction right, isn't it? He wasn't saying everything stopped.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
He wasn't arguing for absolute stagnation like velocity hit zero. It was more a profound slowing down.
Like taking your foot off the gas.
Yeah, or maybe like a high-performance car that was accelerating like crazy, pushing you back in your seat.
Mm-hmm.
And now, well, it's still moving forward, sure, but that rate of acceleration has just plummeted. It might even feel like it's coasting. The forward motion's there, but the impetus, that feeling of breaking new ground, it's faded.
And he used history to show this, right?
He did, a really powerful historical illustration. He looked back from, say, 1750, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, up to about 1970.
That's over 200 years.
Right. And in that huge span, humanity saw relentless, multidimensional acceleration. Just think about the leaps. Sailing ships to steamships.
Railroads shrinking the world.
Then cars, then planes, completely changing travel and trade.
And culminating in things like the Concorde.
Supersonic flight.
Mm.
And Apollo, putting people on the moon. I mean, truly astonishing physical achievements.
And his point is, after 1970,
The contrast is stark. That kind of acceleration across all these different physical dimensions, it just seems to have dissipated. It feels like arrested development in a lot of areas.
now he does acknowledge the exception, the big one.
Oh, yeah, he's pragmatic. He definitely acknowledges the world of bits, as he calls it.
Computers, software, the internet.
Mobile internet, crypto, and now obviously the AI revolution. I mean, that's undeniably where we've seen incredible, almost dizzying speed.
Exponential growth, right?
For sure. The digital realm is incredibly dynamic, pushing boundaries constantly.
But here's the kicker, right? Thiel's big question.
Exactly. Is this acceleration, which is mostly just in the world of bits, is it enough? Is it enough to counteract that general stagnation he sees everywhere else?
In the physical world, the world of atoms.
Yeah. It's a profound question because it forces you to ask, are our digital marvels really pushing humanity forward holistically? Or are we just digging deeper into this one specific digital well while other crucial parts of progress are just lying fallow?
Is the digital boom masking a deeper slowdown?
That's the worry.
And this leads to another problem, almost philosophical. How do you even measure this stuff? Stagnation, acceleration. It's complex.
It really is. Thiel calls it an epistemological challenge. Fancy term for how do we even know what's really going on?
Especially when everything is so specialized now.
Totally. How do you meaningfully weigh progress in, say, string theory versus quantum computing versus cancer research? The metrics are just so different. The impacts are diffuse.
You can't just add them up.
Nope. Trying to quantify or compare them, you inevitably end up assigning arbitrary weights. That introduces bias right away.
And Thiel's point is, the very fact that it's so hard to answer.
Yeah, the fact that progress is often only understood by these ever narrower groups of guardians in their little silos.
That itself should make us skeptical.
That's his argument. When no one can really paint a coherent picture of progress across the board, maybe there isn't as much broad progress as we assume.
Okay, so to make this less abstract, he uses that Back to the Future analogy.
Which is brilliant, yeah. Think about the first movie. If you watched it in '85, comparing 1955 to 1985.
Huge difference. Cars, clothes, tech, society. Almost unrecognizable in 30 years.
Totally transformed. Then you look at part two, which imagined 2015 from 1989. Flying cars, hoverboards.
A radically different physical world, truly revolutionary stuff envisioned.
Right. But now step back and look at the real world. Compare 1985 to, say, 2025.
That's not that different.
Thiel argues a kid from 2025 would recognize 85 pretty easily. Okay, cars look a bit different, no smartphones everywhere, internet wasn't ubiquitous.
But the basic infrastructure, the cities, homes, how we get around.
Remarkably similar. No flying cars, no widespread high-speed rail, no dramatic changes in the built environment. That common sense test, it really highlights this lack of radical physical change compared to earlier 30-year jumps.
So, if we accept this stagnation thesis, at least partially, what are the ripple effects, the societal implications?
Thiel points to some really critical and, often uncomfortable areas. Economically, there's a deeply personal measure. How do your living standards compare to your parents?
Oof. The generational question?
Right. He asked, if you're a 30-year-old millennial today, how are you doing versus your boomer parents when they were 30?
Yeah, for a lot of people.
For a significant chunk, it's not a clear story of upward mobility. It's often a struggle with housing costs, flat wages, feeling like you're falling behind. That fundamentally challenges the whole American dream, right? That each generation does better.
Definitely shakes that foundation. What about intellectually?
Intellectually, Thiel sees diminishing returns, especially starkly in science and academia. He describes it pretty harshly as feeling like a sociopathic, Malthusian kind of an institution.
Whoa, Malthusian meaning?
Meaning like it's hitting its limits. You have to throw more and more resources in, more grant money, more researchers chasing fewer big breakthroughs, more years spent in grad school just to get the same, or maybe even less in return.
Like running faster just to stay in the same place.
Exactly. Imagine this giant research bureaucracy where the main innovation is figuring out how to get the next grant, not how to make the next discovery.
That sounds stifling.
It's inherently unsustainable and intellectually suffocating if you need massive input just for flat or declining output.
And then the biggest social impact, the collapsing middle class.
Yeah, and Thiel has this really stark but insightful definition. The middle class is the people who expect their kids to do better than themselves.
Simple but powerful.
Incredibly. And when that fundamental expectation collapses, when people stop believing in upward mobility for the next generation, Thiel argues the whole social fabric starts to unravel.
Especially for Western countries built on that promise of growth.
Absolutely. Their first 200 years were predicated on constant growth and progress. Take that away, and the social contract feels broken.
And this stagnation, it fuels political instability.
Directly. Our institutions, especially government budgets, social programs, they're all built on the assumption of continuous growth. an expanding tax base.
Right. You need growth to pay for things.
Thiel points to examples like Reagan's consumer capitalism, which he kind of implies was fueled by borrowing, not real productivity gains,
Okay.
and Obama's low-tax socialism, which also needed growth to sustain programs without big tax hikes. Both, he says, are ultimately unsustainable without real economic growth.
And when that growth isn't there,
You get deep instability, a lack of optimism, widespread discontent, political polarization. It all feeds on itself.
and this feeling of stagnation can even lead to these visions of, well, anti-growth futures.
Yeah, Peele talks about the Greta future, using Greta Thunberg as a symbol for this kind of thinking. An anti-growth, maybe even authoritarian, oppressive degrowth society.
Where the goal is to shrink human impact.
Right. Limiting consumption, deindustrializing, basically reducing human activity for ecological reasons.
Yeah.
It's a stark alternative to the growth model.
Almost monastic.
And Thiel sees this as a direct consequence of giving up on multidimensional progress.
Yeah.
If we can't grow, the logic goes, then we must shrink. And that shrinking might come with huge costs to freedom and prosperity.
Okay, so that's the what and the so what. Now the big one, why? Why did this happen? This brings us back to Weaver's metaphor, right? The damming of the river of reality.
Exactly. Weaver, building on Thiel, uses this powerful image. He talks about the river of reality being this torrential, accelerating force for the Industrial Revolution up to around 1970.
Driven by what? What made the river flow?
Fundamental flows of energy, materials, and biological understanding. These were relatively unimpeded, and they translated directly into tangible, broad progress, infrastructure, medicine, everything.
But around 1970, the current faltered.
It faltered, and crucially, it became unbalanced. The world of bits, digital tech, AI, info processing that kept raging forward.
But the physical world.
The world of atoms, new energy sources, transport, manufacturing, fundamental medicine that slowed to a trickle.
And Weaver's point is, you can't run a civilization on just bits.
Emphatically not. A complex system needs parallel physical progress. You can't just thrive on data alone. If those foundational flows are choked off, the whole system feels stuck no matter how fancy the computers get, like a river dammed up with silt.
Okay, so how did the dam get built? This connects to Thiel's point about institutions becoming degraded and risk-averse.
Right, and this connects directly to Weaver's framework in The Fortress and the Shifting Sands. Specifically, his theory of nearly decomposable systems, or NDS.
NDS, nearly decomposable systems. What are those?
Think of NDS as systems designed primarily for stability, for managing their own internal complexity, like the big institutions built after World War II during that growth era.
They're built to last, to be resilient.
Exactly. They hunker down, batten down the hatches. They excel at internal efficiency, consistency, predictability within their defined boundaries, optimized for a specific environment.
But there's a catch, a fatal flaw.
There is. This intense internal optimization, which is great for stability, ironically leads to external blindness.
Blindness. How?
When the environment outside the fortress starts to change, slowly but surely, the fortress doesn't see it. Its sensory apparatus, its ability to detect and interpret external shifts, it gets underdeveloped or ignored.
So its strength becomes a weakness.
Precisely.
Yep.
Internal coherence turns into calcification, irrelevance, because the fortress can't effectively perceive or respond to a reality that no longer matches its internal map. It's perfectly adapted for a world that's already gone.
Can we see examples of this fortress mentality?
Oh, definitely. Thiel points to Alzheimer's research as a really tragic example.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. Stuck on beta amyloid for decades.
For 40, 50 years, despite a consistent, clear lack of real progress in treatments or cures, it's a perfect example of a self-reinforcing fortress, a dominant paradigm that just repels new data, dismisses alternatives that don't fit.
He called it a stupid racket.
Pretty blunt, yeah. A system optimized for its own survival, not for solving the actual problem.
And the moonshot metaphor.
Another great example, once moonshot meant actually going to the moon. An incredible feat of engineering.
Now it means...
Now, Thiel says when someone talks about a moonshot for some big problem, it often means something completely fictional that's never going to happen.
like an impossible dream.
Yeah, a rhetorical flourish for something we feel we can't actually solve. That shift in meaning reflects the fortress substituting its old internal map, where big physical things were possible for the current reality, where they seem out of reach. The ambition itself has shrunk.
And an Einstein today would get lost in the mailroom.
That's Thiel's stark image. Someone with truly revolutionary ideas wouldn't be able to penetrate the fortress. The very systems meant to foster discovery, peer review, grants, hierarchies. They become barriers to disruptive innovation if an idea doesn't fit the mold.
Weaver has that martial arts analogy, right? Kata versus sparring.
Yes, from the fortress and the shifting sands. It clarifies this NDS vulnerability brilliantly. Kata is a highly optimized, preset sequence of moves.
Good against attacks you expect, builds muscle memory, efficiency.
Exactly. Internal consistency. But sparring, that's different. It requires an active sensory system.
Your head on a swivel.
You got it. Constantly gathering real-time data from a changing opponent. Feints, rhythm shifts, intent.
You have to react to what's actually happening.
Right. Without that active sensing and the choice to deviate from the pre-planned Kata based on new info, the Kata becomes a liability. You become a robot executing a flawless but irrelevant routine.
Your internal perfection is useless against an unpredictable reality.
It's a fatal flaw because it's disconnected from the external dynamic truth.
And this applies to programmers too.
Seamlessly. Engineers naturally use trusted, optimized frameworks, their NDS of code modules for new problems. They worked before.
But if the new problem is subtly different,
that elegant, optimized old framework becomes the wrong solution. Beautifully coded, maybe, but ineffective because it failed to sense the shift in the environment, like using a desert map in a forest.
And this calcification happens in social systems too. Organizations, movements.
Absolutely. Successful groups can become echo chambers. They optimize for internal consistency, validating their own views, filtering out dissent.
Feel strong internally.
It becomes dangerously blind to external shifts, values, tech, economics. That internal reinforcement leads straight to stagnation because they lose touch with the outside world.
Okay, so how does politics fit in? Teal sees politics as actively building the dam.
Yeah, in his view, and Weaver interprets this, regulatory bodies like the FDA, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they were initially created to guide the river, ensure safety.
Good intentions.
But eventually they became primary architects of the dam. They start enforcing stasis.
Under the banner of safety.
Which is an almost unimpeachable justification, right? But taken to an extreme, the pursuit of absolute safety can kill progress.
And these bodies have global reach.
They often do, effectively. The FDA, for example.
Yeah.
Other countries often just defer to its decisions. So if the FDA is slow or risk-averse, it slows drug development everywhere.
Wow. And the NRC with nuclear power.
Same idea. Its stringent regulations impact nuclear design and construction worldwide. Teal points out that innovative, potentially safer designs can't even get built in places like Argentina, which might desperately need clean energy.
So nuclear, once seen as the future,
got off-ramped all over the world on a worldwide basis, largely due to these regulatory fortresses preventing the flow of new energy and material development.
Okay, understanding this fortress idea makes Teal's political moves, like backing Trump in 2016, make more sense. From his perspective, anyway.
It does provide context. Teal explicitly calls himself a venture capitalist for politics.
Meaning he backs disruptors.
Yeah, he's willing to back unconventional, high-risk, disruptive agents if he thinks they can shake up a stagnant status quo, just like investing in a disruptive startup.
So supporting Trump wasn't about detailed policy.
Less about building a perfect new system. More about using Trump as a battering ram aimed at the fortress walls. That's the framing.
A high-risk strategy could just make rubble.
Huge risk. Smashing a fortress can lead to ruin. But from that system's perspective Weaver outlines, Teal presents it as a desperate act of choice when the fortress refuses to see reality, staying blind to the shifting sands.
Did he have smaller goals too?
He did. He hoped to at least spark a conversation about decline. When Trump said, "Make America great again," it forced the question, was America not great now?
It implicitly acknowledged a problem.
Right. Teal admitted low expectations for Trump's constructive actions, but he appreciated someone who wasn't offering the usual syrupy Bush nonsense, that polite rhetoric that ignored the deeper issues. He wanted the problem named.
But did that conversation actually happen?
Well, Teal conceded later that expecting a rational conversation in 2016 was maybe a preposterous fantasy. The political climate was too intense.
But he thinks things have shifted since then.
He does. He notes the conversation around stagnation has changed, even among tech figures who were skeptical before. People like Eric Schmidt, Mark Andreessen, Jeff Bezos.
The everything's great crowd?
Some of them, yeah. He argues they've updated and adjusted their views, acknowledging things are more complex, maybe more concerning, regarding broad progress. The discourse in Silicon Valley itself has shifted.
And that's tied to the shift in political alignment we're seeing now. More tech leaders backing Trump in 2024.
It seems linked. Thiel suggests they increasingly see populism, despite its rough edges, as a potential vehicle for technological innovation and economic dynamism.
A bet that disruption is needed to break the logjam.
Kind of a calculation that chaotic disruption might be necessary to break through the regulatory and institutional fortresses they see holding things back.
So for Thiel, populism is the best option.
Still by far the best option we have, he's quoted as saying, compared to elite institutions like Harvard puttering along on dementia research with no results. It's that can't get worse, let's try disruption mindset.
But the critique is still valid, right? Populists might just want to tear down, not build.
Absolutely. They might be happy to cut funding to establish science, but without any real plan for what comes next. You risk throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Deconstruction without construction.
Which connects back to that Manhattan Project versus moonshot idea.
Exactly. Manhattan Project used to mean this massive, focused, world-changing effort. Now, moonshot also means never going to happen.
A loss of ambition, a loss of belief in big physical achievements.
It reflects a deep cultural shift. Thiel stresses you need both parts. Deregulation, clearing the dam, deconstruction, but also new visions, funding for real innovation, construction. Otherwise, disruption just leads to chaos, not renewal.
And Thiel finds politics itself toxic.
He seems to have a schizophrenic view, yeah. Sees it as incredibly important, but also incredibly toxic, zero-sum, creating enemies, consuming energy.
You mentioned that conversation with Elon Musk.
Right, in 2024. Musk, who used to talk about Mars as the escape, the alternative.
Living frontier.
Now apparently believes the woke AI and socialist U.S. government would just follow you there.
Wow. That's a big shift. From building an alternative to feeling you have to win some kind of battle on Earth first. It suggests the stagnation is seen as systemic, pervasive, inescapable, even off-planet.
Okay, let's pivot to AI, the big exception to stagnation.
All right. If Thiel's thesis holds, AI is the glaring counterexample. It is remarkable progress. Thiel acknowledges it's maybe the only thing we have in terms of really accelerated change right now.
The torrent in the otherwise sluggish river.
Exactly. But Thiel remains pragmatic about it. He calls it more than a nothing burger, so it's real, but less than the total transformation of our society. He puts it roughly on par with the internet in the late 90s. It'll add maybe a few points to GDP, some productivity gain.
Not remake reality itself.
Not necessarily. And his big concern is that it's unbalanced progress. He wishes we had multidimensional progress Mars, dementia cures, not just AI getting faster. He's skeptical of the idea that super smart AI will just solve everything else. The cascade theory.
Very skeptical. The theory goes, AI gets smart enough, it suddenly solves aging, figures out fusion, designs the perfect Mars factory. Like magic.
Just needs enough IQ points.
Right. And Thiel questions if IQ was ever really the main gating factor. He critiques that Silicon Valley ideology that fixates on IQ as the universal solvent.
He thinks the problem might be societal, not intellectual.
Yeah, he brings up that economics antique argument. Sometimes really smart people do badly, or society just doesn't know what to do with them or their ideas.
They don't fit in.
Right, which suggests the real bottleneck isn't raw IQ, but something deeply wrong with our society. Maybe cultural, institutional resistance to radical change.
So are problems like dementia just inherently unsolvable? Is that the pessimistic take?
That's one possibility. But Thiel leans more towards cultural things, being the barrier. Society's inability to tolerate heterodox smart people or crazy experiments.
Ideas outside the mainstream fortress.
Exactly. And if AI is just conventionally smart, if it's conformist, he uses the analogy of wokeness as a kind of conformist intelligence.
Optimizing for existing norms?
Yeah. Then it might not actually break through the stagnation. It could just make the current system more efficient, not fundamentally different or more innovative.
Which leads to that really chilling idea. AI becomes stagnation.
That's the fear. An AI that's super intelligent, maybe even creative, but only in a conformist way.
Like the Netflix algorithm you mentioned. Perfect recommendations, but nothing truly new.
Exactly. Generating infinite okay movies, okay ideas. It can make loads of people obsolete, put them out of work, but actually deepen stagnation by making it smoother, more efficient, maybe even more comfortable.
Removing the friction that sparks breakthroughs.
Could be. A perfectly smooth, perfectly stagnant surface.
Still, Thiel thinks it's better than nothing.
He does. It's a risk, but still better than the alternative, which is nothing at all, his analogy. The internet had lots of downsides, but it was still better than no internet. Progress, even flawed progress, is better than none.
And he critiques Silicon Valley for missing the bigger picture, focusing too much on the micro details of AI.
Yeah, she says they're always bad at what the meaning of tech is. Obsessed with IQ scores, AGI definition.
Instead of the macro implications.
Right. He pushes for asking intermediate questions. What does AI mean for budget deficits? The macroeconomy. Geopolitics. Like, does AI make China invading Taiwan more or less likely?
Yeah.
Deterrent or accelerant? These huge questions, he feels, aren't getting enough thought from the builders.
Okay, this seems like a natural point to transition to the really heavy stuff. The chilling endgame Thiel talks about, existential risk.
Right. Usually when we talk existential risks, it's the runaway dystopian science text stuff, as Thiel puts it.
Nuclear war, climate catastrophe, bioweapons, rogue AI, Skynet.
The classic disaster scenarios. But Thiel offers this alternative bad singularity,
Which is,
the one-world totalitarian state.
wow, how does that connect?
He points out that the default political solution proposed for all those other risks, nuclear, AI, etc., often boils down to one-world governance.
A global authority to control the dangerous stuff.
Exactly. A UN with real teeth controlling nukes, or global compute governance monitoring all computers to stop dangerous AI.
And Thiel asks, is that jumping from the frying pan into the fire?
Precisely. He frames it using those two lenses. The atheist view of one world or none, the fear of annihilation driving us to unify.
Versus the Christian framing of Antichrist or Armageddon.
Right, the terrifying one-world state of the Antichrist versus chaotic destruction. For Thiel, they're kind of the same question on one level. Both grapple with control versus chaos at the ultimate scale.
And he has this twist on how the Antichrist figure takes over, not hypnotic speeches.
No, he finds that implausible. His chillingly modern answer. The Antichrist takes over by talking about Armageddon nonstop, by constantly hammering on existential risk.
Preying on fear.
Exactly. And notice, this is the opposite of the old trope of the evil tech genius, the Dr. Strangelove building the doomsday machine.
In our world, the resonant message is stop science, control tech.
That's Thiel's point. Figures like Greta Thunberg, the AI safety movement, they represent the politically powerful force now. So the modern Antichrist isn't a tech wizard, but someone who promises to control technology, make it safe, and usher in a kind of universal stagnation.
Playing on fear to gain control, come with me to avoid Skynet.
That's the idea. The promise is safety. The price is freedom and progress, leading to total stasis.
Which brings up that Palantir paradox. Douthat's challenge.
Yeah, Ross Douthat's brilliant challenge. Wouldn't the Antichrist love Palantir? A tool designed for sensing and mapping information.
Could become the perfect tool for control.
It could become the very instrument the ultimate fortress uses to eliminate all dissent and freeze the river into a dead object. A state, Thiel hints. That might be like hell. The tool for navigating reality becomes the tool for ending it.
And Thiel even suggests we're kind of already living under a moderate version of this.
Provocatively, yes. He suggests we're already living under a moderate rule of the Antichrist in some ways. He references that Bible verse, 1 Thessalonians 5.3, about peace and safety being the slogan of false security.
And his examples are the FDA and NRC again.
Exactly. The FDA regulating drugs globally by de facto deference, slowing innovation worldwide for safety. The NRC's global impact effectively off-ramping nuclear power.
So stagnation isn't just running out of ideas. It's being enforced.
That's the alternative explanation he offers for the last 50 years. Either we ran out of steam or something happened culturally where it wasn't allowed. A top-down machinery of government and institutions enforcing stagnation, maybe unintentionally, under the banner of safety.
And his provocative conclusion, the hippies did win.
Yeah, after Woodstock 69, implying that cultural shift towards environmentalism, risk aversion, anti-technology sentiment fundamentally changed the trajectory and progress stopped.
Wow. Okay. To really get the full picture here, we need to zoom out and understand Weaver's river of reality concept more deeply, the systemic view.
Absolutely. Weaver emphasizes flow as this fundamental universal principle. He calls it an isomorphism in systems thinking.
Meaning the same pattern shows up everywhere.
Pretty much. From a particle moving to ideas spreading in society. Understanding flow is key to understanding how any system works, evolves, creates complexity, or gets stuck. It's the basic dynamic of everything.
And he has this standard systems model, built on energy, material, and information.
Right, the foundational trinity, EM and I. He shows how the flow and interaction of just these three build reality, layer by layer. From simple physics to complex societies, they're the basic building blocks, the universal currencies.
So tier one is the physical base.
Yep, physics 101, essentially. Flow defined by kinematics, motion, velocity, acceleration, even jerk.
How acceleration changes.
Right. And when you scale up, you use concepts like vector fields, flux, measuring the transfer rate of energy or material, this predictable, stable flow of E, M, and I at the base level that creates the canvas for everything else. Without stable physics, no complexity emerges.
Then tier 2 is life emerging.
Astonishingly, yes. The cell is the first integrated, self-maintaining, self-replicating system. It manages its internal state by controlling EMI flows, ATP for energy, nutrients for material, chemical signals for information. A tiny factory.
And cells team up to form organs.
They communicate, cooperate, specialize. Forming organs, managing specific flows, heart pumps blood, lungs process air, nerves transmit senses, brain orchestrates thought.
Leading to the organism.
The integrated organism,
Okay.
a coherent whole, showing basic consciousness, unified reactions, innate drives. Information flow integrated at a much higher level for survival and action.
Okay, tier 3 is where humans and society come in. A cascade of flows.
Exactly. Human self-awareness kicks off this cascade, each flow building on the last. First, science. Studies truth, produces data, creates that stable, shared flow of information about reality, the bedrock of advanced civilization, allows prediction, technology.
Then art, studying membership.
Right. Art studies membership, belonging, produces beauty, creates the flow of connection, shared identity, love in a broad sense, shared symbols, stories, forming cohesive groups beyond just survival, camaraderie.
Building on connection comes.
Religion and ethics, studying value, producing judgment, codifying what's important, prioritizing behavior. This creates the flow of hierarchy, social norms, order. Crucially, it enables social trust between non-kin, allowing cooperation on shared rules.
And trust enables economics.
Exactly. With social trust, economics emerges. Studies exchange, produces markets, generates the flow of commerce, complexity, specialization, wealth, goods, services, capital. Scaling prosperity.
And finally, politics manages the complexity.
Yes. Politics emerges last in this tier. Studies force, produces action, laws, policies, creates the flow of governance, managing the large-scale collective problems created by commerce, resource management, defense, the societal management layer.
And the core principle is dependency. Each layer needs the one below it to be stable.
Absolutely. No stable information, science, no real connection,
Yeah.
no trusted hierarchy, religion, ethics, no trust, no complex markets, economics, no functioning economy, no stable governance, politics. Disrupt a lower level, and the instability ripples all the way up.
So what's the capstone? What sits above politics?
The ultimate capstone in Weaver's model is philosophy, but it's not just the next stage. It's a transcendental metasystem. It reflects on the entire structure beneath it.
How is it different from science studying truth?
Philosophy studies wisdom. It seeks holistic understanding. It grapples with the biggest questions: metaphysics, what is real? Epistemology, how do we know? Ethics, aesthetics, logic.
And its output isn't data, but
Frameworks. Overarching conceptual models for making sense of everything. The scientific method itself is a philosophical framework. Political ideologies, economic theories, even Weaver's standard systems model. Philosophy provides the architecture for thought itself.
wow. And this leads to
The ultimate emergent flow, consciousness. When these philosophical frameworks, these architectures for thought, truly permeate a system, an individual mind, or a whole society, the system becomes capable of self-reflection.
moving beyond just operating to asking why.
Precisely. Why these values? Why this outcome? What's the purpose? This critical, recursive self-reflection is the flow of consciousness. The system achieves self-awareness, understands its own place in the flow of reality.
And consciousness allows for intentional change, a feedback loop.
A crucial feedback loop. It allows intentional creation, building new artificial structures, genetic engineering, planning societies. It represents the system achieving ultimate agency.
The ability to choose its future, not just react.
Exactly. Moving from being reactive to being proactive, self-directing.
And Weaver uses the PhD analogy for this.
It's a powerful analogy. The Doctor of Philosophy is the highest degree, regardless of field. Physics, art, history, economics. They all culminate in a PhD.
Not a doctorate of physics, but of philosophy.
Right. It implicitly recognizes that true mastery requires going beyond just the practice, to grappling with the foundational assumptions, the limits, the methodology, the place of your field within all knowledge. Earning a PhD means becoming a philosopher of your domain, achieving that systemic self-awareness.
Okay, so bringing it all together. We started with Thiel's unsettling stagnation thesis
Explored Weaver's river of reality, how it flows and how it gets dammed by fortresses.
and ended up with Thiel's stark choice: Antichrist or Armageddon, the perfectly controlled, stagnant system versus chaotic, destructive flow.
Right. And viewed through this lens, Thiel's work, his investments, his politics, it looks like this desperate search for a third way,
How to restart the river of reality.
without getting swept away by the flood or entombed by the dam.
Which brings us back to Weaver's idea of an open NDS, the adaptive fortress.
Exactly. A truly resilient system isn't just internally strong. It actively invests in its senses, constantly gathers info from outside, and crucially, retains the agency, the choice, to adapt its internal structure based on what it learns.
It acts on new understanding, doesn't just file it away.
It has to. The key for us, as a civilization, is finding that balance. Internal coherence, the stability we need.
But also external awareness, making sure our fortresses have windows.
And that we're willing to look through them and actually act on what we see, even if it requires fundamental change inside.
So the final thought for you, listening. Now that you've explored this damming of the river of reality, how do these ideas, stagnant fortresses, flowing consciousness, apply to the systems you navigate every day?
In your work, your community, maybe even your own thinking. Are you operating like an open NDS, sensing and adapting?
Or are your internal maps maybe subtly guiding you past a world that's actually shifting under your feet?
This deep dive really leaves us with that powerful, maybe urgent idea. Our future isn't set in stone. It's an ongoing choice.
A choice demanding active sensing, critical reflection, and, bold intentional action.